Before 1916, you could not walk into a store and pick your own groceries off the shelf. A clerk did it for you, one item at a time. Then a man in Memphis, Tennessee, had an idea that seemed almost too simple to work. He let customers serve themselves. Within a few years, he lost the entire company to a Wall Street battle. This is the true history of the first supermarket. Today, supermarkets are everywhere. Walk into almost any city or town, and you will find a large store filled with aisles of packaged food, fresh produce, and household goods, all arranged so customers can walk around and pick out what they want by themselves. This idea feels completely normal today, but it did not always exist. Before the 1920s, grocery shopping worked in a very different way, and one man in Memphis, Tennessee, changed that forever. This is the full story of how the modern supermarket came to be. Before the modern supermarket existed, grocery shopping was slow and required a large amount of staff. Customers would walk into a small grocery store and hand a written list, or simply speak their order out loud, to a clerk standing behind a long counter. The clerk would then walk around the store gathering each item one at a time. Flour, sugar, canned goods, dried beans, and other products were often stored behind the counter or up on high shelves, completely out of reach of customers. This process, known as counter service, took a long time to complete for each individual customer, and it required stores to employ many clerks just to keep up with a normal day of business. This older system also made it very difficult for stores to keep their prices low, since a clerk had to personally handle every single item for every single customer. Labor costs made up a large part of a store's daily expenses. Stores also struggled to buy products in large bulk quantities efficiently, since most orders were still handled one item at a time rather than through any kind of large, organized process. Because of all this, grocery shopping could be a slow, inconvenient, and sometimes expensive part of daily life for most ordinary families during this period. The man who eventually changed this entire system was named Clarence Saunders. He was born in Amherst County, Virginia, in 1881. His family did not have much money, and Saunders grew up in fairly modest conditions. As a teenager, he left school early and began working a series of different jobs to help support his family financially. He eventually found steady work within the grocery business itself, first taking a position as a lowly clerk. Over the following several years, he worked his way up gradually within a number of different grocery companies, learning as much as he possibly could about how the industry worked at every level. Through this hands-on experience, Saunders came to understand the grocery business extremely well, from the perspective of a low-level clerk all the way up to higher management roles. Along the way, he began noticing the exact same inefficiencies that many customers and store owners already quietly complained about. Long waits, high staffing costs, and slow, inconsistent service seemed to be common problems across the entire industry, no matter which specific grocery store a customer happened to visit. Saunders became convinced that there had to be a faster, cheaper, and generally more efficient way to run a grocery store from top to bottom. He began developing a bold new idea that would allow customers to serve themselves directly, without needing to rely on a clerk at all. Instead of asking an employee to fetch every single item on their list, customers could instead walk through the store on their own, pick up their own items directly off open shelves, and carry everything themselves to a checkout counter located at the very end of the store. This concept feels extremely familiar and obvious to us today, but at the time it was considered a radical, unusual, and completely untested business idea within the industry. In 1916, Clarence Saunders opened his very first store in Memphis, Tennessee, based entirely on this brand new self-service concept. He named the store Piggly Wiggly. This unusual name has never been fully or officially explained by Saunders himself, and over the following years, he reportedly gave several different, sometimes joking or contradictory, answers whenever people asked him directly where the name came from. Regardless of the somewhat strange name, the store itself represented a genuinely new and different way of grocery shopping for the average American family. Inside the store, Saunders carefully designed a specific layout intended to guide customers along a single, continuous path through the building. This path led shoppers past shelf after shelf of clearly organized and individually priced products. Upon entering the store, Customers picked up a small shopping basket near the entrance. They then walked freely through the store, gathering their own chosen items along the way, before finally proceeding toward a single checkout counter located near the exit, where they paid for everything together at once. Saunders also introduced individually priced items, each with a clear and visible price tag attached directly to the product itself. Under the older counter service system, prices were often not clearly marked at all, and customers were forced to ask a clerk directly for the cost of nearly every single item they wanted to buy. By clearly labeling every price throughout the store, Saunders gave customers significantly more control, transparency, and confidence over their own everyday shopping decisions. This new self-service model turned out to be far more efficient overall than the older counter service system it replaced. Since customers were now responsible for gathering their own items personally, stores needed to employ far fewer clerks working the sales floor each day. This change dramatically reduced ongoing labor costs for the business as a whole. With these lower operating costs, Saunders was able to offer noticeably lower prices to his customers, all while still running a genuinely profitable business overall. The store became popular almost immediately among local shoppers in Memphis, and word about this strange, unusual new type of grocery store soon began spreading well beyond the local area. Clarence Saunders quickly recognized the much larger potential to expand this new business concept far beyond just a single store location. In 1917, only 1 year after opening his very first Piggly Wiggly location, Saunders formally patented his self-service store design through the United States patent system. This patent specifically covered several key elements of the store, including its overall layout, its distinctive turnstile entrance system, and the carefully organized path that guided customers naturally through the store's various aisles. By securing this patent, Saunders was able to protect his original idea from being directly copied by competitors, at least for a certain period of time. Piggly Wiggly grew rapidly through this franchising and licensing system, in some ways similar to business models that other major American companies would later adopt decades afterward. By the early 1920s, hundreds of individual Piggly Wiggly stores had opened across the United States, with a particularly strong concentration throughout the American South and the Midwest region. The chain quickly became a well-known and generally trusted name associated with affordable, convenient grocery shopping in many American towns and cities throughout this period of rapid national expansion. As Piggly Wiggly continued growing at a rapid pace, Clarence Saunders personally became an increasingly wealthy and well-known businessman across the country. However, his personal story soon took a dramatic and ultimately quite difficult turn. In the early 1920s, Saunders became directly involved in a major financial battle over control of Piggly Wiggly's publicly traded stock on Wall Street. A group of investors, believing the company's stock price had climbed too high relative to its actual value, attempted to deliberately drive the price back down through a coordinated and aggressive short-selling campaign. Saunders, who believed very strongly in the long-term value of his own company, decided to fight back directly against these investors. He personally began buying enormous quantities of Piggly Wiggly stock himself, attempting to control the overall price of the stock and ultimately defeat the short sellers at their own game. This unusual and high-stakes financial battle quickly became a major news story across the country at the time, drawing significant public attention from financial reporters and ordinary readers alike, many of whom had never even heard of stock short selling before this event. Saunders ultimately overextended himself quite severely during the course of this prolonged financial fight. When the New York Stock Exchange eventually intervened directly and changed its trading rules right in the middle of the ongoing conflict, granting the short sellers additional time to settle their trades, Saunders was left in an extremely weakened financial position almost overnight. Despite his best efforts, he was eventually forced into personal and business bankruptcy, and as a direct result, he permanently lost control of the very company he had originally built from nothing. This represented an especially painful and dramatic downfall for a man who had single-handedly transformed the entire grocery industry just a handful of years earlier. Despite losing Piggly Wiggly entirely, Clarence Saunders did not give up on the grocery business altogether. In the years that followed his bankruptcy, he made several further attempts to build entirely new grocery store concepts of his own. One such venture was called Clarence Saunders Sole Owner of My Name Stores, An unusual and deliberately chosen name meant specifically to avoid any future legal disputes involving ownership rights to his own name, following his earlier painful legal battles connected to the original Piggly Wiggly brand. He later also developed an early, highly mechanized store concept known as Speedee-style, which relied on punch cards and various mechanical systems in an ambitious attempt to further automate the entire grocery shopping process. However, none of these later business ventures ever came close to achieving the same level of success or lasting historical impact as his original 1916 Piggly Wiggly concept. Clarence Saunders eventually passed away in 1953. Saunders ultimately overextended himself quite severely during the course of this prolonged financial fight. When the New York Stock Exchange eventually intervened directly and changed its trading rules right in the middle of the ongoing conflict, granting the short sellers additional time to settle their trades, Saunders was left in an extremely weakened financial position almost overnight. Despite his best efforts, he was eventually forced into personal and business bankruptcy, and as a direct result, he permanently lost control of the very company he had originally built from nothing. This represented an especially painful and dramatic downfall for a man who had single-handedly transformed the entire grocery industry just a handful of years earlier. Despite losing Piggly Wiggly entirely, Clarence Saunders did not give up on the grocery business altogether. In the years that followed his bankruptcy, he made several further attempts to build entirely new grocery store concepts of his own. One such venture was called Clarence Saunders, sole owner of My Name Stores. An unusual and deliberately chosen name meant specifically to avoid any future legal disputes involving ownership rights to his own name, following his earlier painful legal battles connected to the original Piggly Wiggly brand. He later also developed an early, highly mechanized store concept known as Speedee-style, which relied on punch cards and various mechanical systems in an ambitious attempt to further automate the entire grocery shopping process. However, none of these later business ventures ever came close to achieving the same level of success or lasting historical impact as his original 1916 Piggly Wiggly concept. Clarence Saunders eventually passed away in 1953. Even though Saunders personally lost control of Piggly Wiggly itself, the core self-service concept he originally created spread rapidly and permanently changed the entire grocery industry going forward. Other major grocery store chains throughout the country began adopting similar self-service layouts of their own throughout the 1920s and into the 1930s. As individual stores gradually grew larger in order to accommodate more products and more shoppers at once, the modern overall concept of the supermarket, meaning a single large store selling an extremely wide variety of grocery products all under one single roof, slowly began to take clear shape within the industry. One especially important company during this next major phase of grocery history was King Kullen, founded by a man named Michael Kullen in 1930. Kullen opened his very first store in the borough of Queens in New York City, and he is frequently and specifically credited by historians as the true founder of the modern supermarket format, as distinct from Saunders' original, comparatively smaller self-service grocery store concept from over a decade earlier. Kullen combined the self-service shopping model pioneered by Saunders with a dramatically larger overall store size, a much wider range of available products, and a strong overall business focus on extremely high sales volume paired with very low prices. His company's well-known slogan, often translated roughly as "pile it high and sell it cheap," captured this ambitious new business strategy perfectly. Through the 1930s, the supermarket concept spread rapidly and steadily across the entire United States, especially during the difficult economic years of the Great Depression, when keeping prices as low as possible mattered more to struggling families than ever before. Well-established grocery chains such as Kroger and Safeway, which had already existed for years as smaller, more traditional grocery store companies, began actively adapting their own individual stores to include modern self-service layouts and significantly larger overall store sizes, closely following the general model first pioneered by Saunders and later expanded upon and popularized by Kullen. The supermarket concept then continued to grow even more significantly following the end of World War II in 1945. As the United States experienced extremely rapid suburban growth throughout the 1950s, supermarkets expanded right alongside these brand new residential neighborhoods, frequently becoming central anchor stores within newly constructed shopping centers built specifically to serve these growing suburban communities. Refrigeration technology also improved dramatically during this same general period, allowing supermarkets to reliably sell a much wider variety of fresh and frozen food products than had ever previously been possible. further increasing their overall popularity among American families across the entire country. During this same post-war period, supermarkets also began adopting new technologies specifically designed to further speed up the checkout process itself. Mechanical cash registers were gradually improved and refined. Shopping carts, first introduced commercially back in 1937 by a man named Sylvan Goldman, became standard equipment inside nearly every supermarket in the country, replacing the smaller hand baskets that Saunders had originally introduced decades earlier. These larger carts allowed customers to comfortably purchase significantly larger quantities of groceries during each individual shopping trip, which in turn further increased average overall sales for supermarket owners nationwide. The self-service supermarket concept eventually spread internationally as well, gradually adapting itself to fit local shopping habits and distinct cultural preferences within many different countries around the world. In the United Kingdom, self-service grocery stores began appearing during the 1950s, eventually leading to the rise of major chains such as Tesco and Sainsbury's, both of which adopted supermarket-style formats over time. In France, a related but distinct format known as the hypermarket emerged during the 1960s, combining an even larger supermarket with a full general merchandise department store all under one enormous roof, pioneered largely by companies such as Carrefour. In Japan, self-service supermarkets began appearing during the 1950s as well, though they were often carefully adapted to fit smaller available urban spaces and distinctly local shopping habits and preferences, compared to the much larger supermarket formats commonly seen throughout the United States. Similarly, across other parts of Asia, Latin America, and eventually Africa, the basic self-service supermarket concept continued spreading over the following decades, with each individual country and region adapting the format somewhat differently based on local infrastructure, existing culture, and specific consumer needs and preferences. Barcode scanning technology represented another major turning point in supermarket history. The very first retail product ever scanned using a barcode was a simple pack of chewing gum, scanned at a supermarket checkout counter in Ohio back in 1974. This new barcode technology allowed supermarket checkout lines to move considerably faster than ever before, while also giving store owners far more accurate and detailed data regarding exactly which products were selling well, and which particular products were not selling nearly as well. In more recent decades, supermarkets have continued evolving even further, incorporating self-checkout machines, allowing customers to scan and pay for their own groceries entirely without any direct assistance from a human cashier. Large retail companies such as Walmart, which itself grew into the largest retail corporation in the entire world, further expanded and refined the modern supermarket concept by combining grocery items with general merchandise, all sold together under a single massive roof at deliberately low prices, closely following certain aspects of the earlier hypermarket format first developed in France decades earlier. Most recently, online grocery shopping and home delivery services have begun to reshape the industry once again, allowing customers to order their groceries directly through websites or mobile phone apps, and then have those groceries delivered directly to their home, rather than requiring a customer to physically visit a supermarket at all. This most recent shift accelerated particularly rapidly during the global pandemic in the early 2020s, as many customers actively sought out ways to avoid crowded indoor spaces such as supermarkets, at least for a period of time. The story of the first supermarket is ultimately the story of one determined man solving a fairly simple, practical, everyday problem. That specific problem was making ordinary grocery shopping faster, considerably more affordable, and far more efficient for the average everyday customer. Clarence Saunders may have ultimately lost control of the very company he personally built from nothing, but the fundamental self-service system he first introduced back in 1916 permanently transformed how people all across the entire world continue to buy their food to this very day. That is the complete and true history of the first supermarket, from a single self-service grocery store in Memphis, Tennessee, all the way to a shopping format now found in nearly every single country on Earth.